Hey, it's Coach Todd here again. Something that's been kind of bothering me as I watch people moving around me in everyday life. It's what I would call the epidemic of bad posture. I've got my non-fitness model, Josh, here to demonstrate our poor posture here. So what's happening is that we're sitting all day and we're on our mobile device all day, probably both at the same time, right? And there's some consequences of that on the body. And so there are really three main things that are happening. One is the head posture. You can see that the head is always forward while you're straining to look at the screen. The second thing is the shoulders are rotated forward and kind of sagging in. And then the third thing is in the hips. We're always in this kind of like flexed position at the hips. And so the hip flexors in the front are getting tight and short, while the glutes in the back are getting kind of like slack and elongated. And so I've got a series of exercises that you can do, and I want to encourage everybody to try to find a few minutes, at least once a day, if not twice, whether you're at work, whether you're at home in the living room, whether you're, I guess you can't do it in the car, but right when you get out of the car maybe, is to try to find a few minutes, to go through some of these movements to try to correct that. So go ahead and have Josh stand up a second. We're going to start with the neck, something just called the chin retraction. So you're going to sort of like jut the chin out and then draw it back in. Again, you're really focusing on pulling that chin back in that way as long as you can. We're trying to undo that forward head tilt. The second thing you can do, kind of turn around this way a little bit, is rotation. So he's going to kind of try to look toward one shoulder as far as you can, and come on back around to the other shoulder. I'm just going to repeat that 5 or 6 times on each side. And then finally, we're going to do a head tilt. You're going to imagine that you're taking your ear and you're trying to reach it up toward the ceiling. If you want to extend that arm down at the same time, you'll get a little bit more of a stretch. So if you're lifting your right ear, you'd be extending the right arm, left ear, left arm. Again, you're going to do about 5 or 6 of those on each side. Now, moving down to the shoulders. There's a couple of exercises here that can really help. The first one is just a simple shoulder roll. We've been doing these since we were kids. But really focus on the shoulder blades on the back, trying to make sure those shoulder blades are moving in toward the center as much as possible, and then around the rib cage as you're rolling those shoulders around. 5 or 6 of those. Next is sort of a modified gunslinger stretch. You're going to kind of have you turn sideways a little bit so you can see. Get your hands sort of in the gun position here. You're going to pull those shoulders back and also drop them down like you're trying to run those hands down a little lower. The whole time you need to keep your abs and your glutes on because we don't want that back to be arching while you're doing this, all right? Each time you exhale, just a little further back, a little further down, not a lot, just try to gradually work your way in there. Again, maybe 5 or 6 breaths, and that should be great for the shoulders. Last but not least, a couple of exercises for the hips. I'm going to have Josh down here. The first one is, well, they're both actually kind of some yoga-based stretches, but upward dog or cobra is a good way to get the hips flexing in the opposite direction. Sorry, I should say extending in the opposite direction rather than being flexed. You can see the hips are going the opposite way they would when they're sitting. If you want to, you can have your thighs on the ground here, or you can pick them up and just be on your toes. That's really great. You just kind of hold that for a few seconds, maybe take a break, come back into it again if you need to. Repeat that a couple of times. Another option is to go into a half kneeling pose. This might be a little easier, like on the floor at work. You don't want to just lay on your belly or something like that. So you're going to get into a half kneeling pose. And again, you can see how this hip is fully extended forward and squeezing the glute on that leg. And you can actually kind of rock into that a little bit if you want as well. Get a little bit of flossing going on there. 5 or 6 of those on each side. Should be good to go. Give those a try.